I was standing 6 feet from the man they called the King's Guard when Kwan Deveraux decided to make him the opening act of his own ruin. And because I had a press badge on a lanyard and a camera crew who trusted me to know a story when it walked past, I got the whole thing on the record from the first insult to the last handshake. My name is Neve Astrid. I cover fights for a living, and I have watched a great many strong men learn a great many hard lessons in a great many rings. I had never, until that night in the great riding hall of Harrogate Palace, watched a man be beaten without being touched. Let me set the room, because the room is half the story. Twice a year the Royal House of Harrogate opens the old riding hall for a thing the palace calls Champions for the Realm, a televised charity gala, athletes and fighters and record holders in dinner dress under the chandeliers, an auction, a purse for the veterans' hospitals, the whole gilded machine of goodwill running at full brightness. The Queen herself, Silen, sat at the high table that night with the Prince Consort Aldrich beside her, and the tickets cost more than my car, and every camera in the kingdom that could talk its way past the gate was there. It is, in the plainest terms, the single most watched charity night in Eldermoor, and Kwan Deveraux had spent 8 months and a great deal of somebody's money making certain he was its center. You will know the type even if you have never followed a single fight. Deveraux was 34, unbeaten in the promoted ranks, full contact champion of a circuit he half owned, and the founder and the face and the loudest voice of a fight promotion brand he had named, with no irony at all, Apex Reign. He had come up hard and real, that part was never fake, the man could genuinely fight, and then somewhere in the climb he had discovered that the microphone paid better than the fists, and he had never put it down since. He sold pay-per-views on his mouth. He filled arenas by promising ruin and then delivering it. And he had arrived at a royal charity gala, at a black-tie affair for wounded veterans, wearing a tailored midnight suit with the collar open and no tie, which told you everything about how he intended to spend the evening. He was going to be the one man in the room who refused to observe the room. The King's Guard was posted at the champion's dais. I should be precise about him too, because the whole night turns on the contrast, and I did not understand the contrast until much later. He stood at the corner of the raised platform where the honored athletes would come up to receive their tributes, a ceremonial post, a place of honor, the palace putting one of its own immaculate guardsmen at the shoulder of the evening's dignity. Red wool tunic, tall black bearskin, white gloves. A row of medals I did not look closely enough at that first hour to read. He held the position at attention the way those men do, eyes level and forward, and the light from the chandeliers ran down the brass of his buttons and stopped, as if even the light knew not to bother him. I had seen the guards at the gates on 100 tourist afternoons. I had never seen one this close, indoors, under this light, and I remember thinking, I am ashamed of it now, but I will tell you because it is the exact thought Deveraux was about to say out loud. I remember thinking that he looked less like a soldier than like a very expensive decoration the palace had leaned in the corner. His name, I would learn, was Elias Marrow, Guardsman Marrow. I did not know it that first hour, and neither did anyone in that hall, and that was the whole engine of what happened, because a man with no name is only a costume, and a costume cannot embarrass you, and Kwan Deveraux had built a career on the certainty that nothing in a corner could embarrass him. He found the guard about 40 minutes in between the salmon and the auction, when the champagne had loosened the room, and the cameras were roving for a moment worth cutting. Deveraux was working the floor with 2 men from his promotion trailing him, a manager with a tablet, a young fighter from his own stable in a shiny suit, and a woman with a shoulder-mounted camera from his brand's own channel, because a man like that does not go to an event, he broadcasts one. I drifted after them with my own crew. It is my job to drift after them. I know the sound a story makes when it is about to start, and Deveraux was making it. He stopped in front of the dais. He looked up at Elias Marrow the way a man looks at a menu. "Now this," Deveraux said, loudly enough for the nearest 3 tables and every lens in reach, This is my favorite thing in the whole building." He spread his hands. He had a beautiful carrying voice trained by 10,000 hours of talking rooms into buying tickets. "You see this gentleman? Perfect. Look at him, not a hair wrong. Stood there the whole night, hasn't moved, hasn't blinked, hasn't so much as looked at the food." He grinned at his camera woman, making sure she had it. "Ladies and gentlemen, they've hired a mannequin and put a hat on it, and none of you noticed, because that's exactly what a mannequin's for." A few people laughed. Not cruelly, the loose, relieved laugh of well-dressed people glad that the dangerous-looking celebrity has turned out to be funny. I have heard that laugh in every ring I have ever worked. It costs the crowd nothing and it feeds the man everything, and Deveraux drank it and went looking for more. Elias Marrow did not move, not a flicker. His eyes stayed level and forward over the champion's head, fixed on some point on the far wall that had been the same point for 2 hours, and the not moving was so complete that for a moment the joke seemed to prove itself. See, a mannequin. And then, watching through my own crew's monitor, I caught something the room missed. It was nothing. It was less than nothing. It was the guardsman's gaze, which had been resting on the far wall, drop by perhaps an inch for perhaps half a second to touch the champion's open collar and his open hands, and then rise back to the wall. A count. A read. I did not know then what I was seeing. I know now. I was watching a man who had spent 30 years reading exactly what a body like Deveraux could and could not do. Take the measure of the champion in the space between 2 heartbeats, file it, and go back to holding a wall. Deveraux, of course, saw none of it. He saw the corner and the costume. "He won't even look at me," the champion announced, delighted, circling now, playing to the lenses, careful to keep his own good side to the camera the way a showman keeps his mark. "That's discipline, they'll tell you. That's the famous discipline of the King's Guard. You know what I call it." He leaned in toward the dais, and the smile did not reach the rest of his face, and here, right here, is where the evening quietly changed its nature, because what came out of him next was not a joke anymore. It was contempt, and contempt is a heavier thing than a joke, and it does not evaporate the same way. "I call it easy. I've been hit for a living since I was 14. This man has never been hit in his life. He stands still because nothing's ever made him move. Put him in front of something real for 10 seconds, and the discipline goes out of him like air out of a balloon." He straightened, and he pitched the next line to the whole room, to the Queen's table, to the cameras of a kingdom, and I felt my own crew go still around me because we all knew, professionally, that he had just crossed from an anecdote into an event. "Tell you what," said Kwan Deveraux, "I'll make it interesting." He raised his glass, not to drink, but to gesture with, a man conducting his own orchestra, and he turned in a slow circle so the whole hall could hear the pledge as he made it. "We're all here for the veterans tonight, aren't we? Good cause, best cause. So let's put some real money on it." He was warming now, the numbers coming easy, a man who had auctioned his own violence 100 times and knew exactly how a purse loosens a crowd. "I'll pledge 100,000 to the Veterans Fund right now, tonight, on the record, my own money. And I'll match it. I'll put down 200,000 if this gentleman here, the King's Guard, the pride of the palace, will step off his little box and last 30 seconds with me. 30 seconds. Gloved, refereed in front of all of you for charity. That's it. He doesn't have to win. He doesn't have to land a thing. He just has to stand in front of something real for half a minute and not fall down." He looked up at Marrow with a grin that had put 100 men on the back foot before the bell. 200,000 for the veterans, sir. All you have to do is prove you're a soldier and not a statue. Surely the King's own guard isn't going to let the wounded lads go without, over a little thing like courage." And there it was. That was the trap, and it was a beautiful trap, and I hated it the way you hate a thing that is very well made and aimed at someone who cannot dodge. Because look at what he had built in 90 seconds. If the guard stayed silent, and he would, those men are forbidden to speak on post, forbidden to leave it, forbidden every single thing the challenge required. Then Deveraux got to stand in a royal hall and say the king's guard turned down money for wounded veterans rather than risk his dignity, and every camera in Eldermoor would carry it. And if by some miracle the palace let the man off his post to take the bait, then a 34-year-old full-contact champion would spend 30 seconds doing to a ceremonial guardsman exactly what 34-year-old full-contact champions do, and that would be the clip instead. Silence lost. Motion lost. The veterans, dragged in as a human shield, lost worst of all, because now their fund was hostage to a stunt. He had made a box with no door, in front of a queen, on the most watched night of the year, and he had done it, I understood, on purpose and cold, because a man in a corner with no name is the safest opponent in the world, and Kwan Deveraux had built an entire career on choosing safe opponents dressed up as brave ones. I looked at Elias Marrow to see what a man does inside a trap like that. He did nothing. That is the thing I keep coming back to. He did the exact same nothing he had been doing for 2 hours, eyes level, gloves at his sides, the bearskin dead straight, and I swear to you the nothing looked different now that I knew what it was costing. There was a whole silent argument happening inside the discipline, and the discipline was winning, and the winning was the loudest quiet I have ever stood next to. I have watched fighters wait out the seconds before a title bout with their souls in their throats. None of them held stiller than that man held, while a champion offered a kingdom 200,000 reasons to think him a coward. The hall did the thing halls do. A murmur ran the tables, half scandalized, half thrilled, and the cameras all found the same two faces, the champion's grin and the guardsman's stone, and up at the high table I saw the prince consort Aldrich lean and murmur something to a man in a dark suit at his shoulder, and I saw the man in the dark suit rise and move quietly toward the side of the hall, and I thought, good, the palace has felt it, someone is going to make this stop. I was right that they had felt it. I was entirely wrong about how it would stop. Because Kwan Deveraux was not finished. A man like that never lets a silence sit. A silence is a thing you fill before the crowd starts thinking. He set his glass down on the nearest table, unhurried, and he did the thing that turned a bad night into the night, the thing that took it off the tables and put it, irreversibly, onto the floor. He walked up to the dais, right to the edge of the guardsman's post, closer than the space those men are given, and he lifted one hand slow, showy for the lens, and he laid 2 fingers flat against the center of Elias Marrow's chest, against the red wool over the metals, and he pushed. Not hard. He did not need it to be hard. He needed it to be filmed. It was a tap, a taunt, the kind of touch a man gives a door he already owns, and he said, soft now, just for the guardsman and the boom mic and 40 million eventual views. There's nobody home in there, is there? Come on, show me I'm wrong. Push back. I've replayed that moment more times than I can count, and I will tell you what I saw frame by frame, because the room saw a champion touch a statue and I saw something else entirely. I saw Elias Marrow's eyes come down off the far wall deliberately, the first fully deliberate thing he had done all night, and settle on Kwan Deveraux's face and hold there. That was all. He did not push back. He did not step off his post. He did not so much as tighten his jaw. He simply, for the first time in 2 hours, looked at the man, and let the man see that he had been looked at, and there was in that look no anger at all, which was the strangest part. I kept waiting for the anger, and it never came. There was only a kind of vast, patient, almost sorrowful attention, the look of a man reading the last line of a page he has read 1,000 times and knows how it ends. And Kwan Deveraux, who could read a body the way I read a fight card, felt something in that look that he had absolutely not expected to find in a decoration. I watched it hit him. It lasted 1/4 of a second. His grin did not fall, he was far too good for that. The grin stayed nailed on for the camera. But behind it, in the eyes, some old animal instinct that had kept him alive through 100 real fights lifted its head and said, very quietly, wrong. This is wrong, back up. He did not listen to it. Men like Deveraux have spent their whole lives not listening to it, because listening to it would mean the danger was real, and the danger being real would mean he was not the most dangerous thing in the room, and that was the one fact his entire self was built to never, ever check. So he winked at his camerawoman and he stepped back off the dais, and he turned to the hall with his arms wide, the showman restored, and he called out, "The offer stands. 200,000, 30 seconds, any time this good soldier finds his nerve." And the tables laughed and gasped, and the auction resumed, and the man in the dark suit reached the side door and disappeared through it, and the gala rolled on gleaming and gilded as if nothing had cracked underneath it. But something had cracked underneath it. I could feel it, the way you feel a floor give a 1/16 of an inch before it goes. Kwan Deveraux thought he had bought himself the best clip of the year for the price of a charity pledge. What he had actually done, in front of the Queen of Eldermoor and every camera in the kingdom, was lay 2 fingers on the chest of the one man in that entire glittering hall he should have walked a mile around. And he had no idea, not the faintest idea, and the not knowing was about to cost him the only thing he had never once put on the line. I did not know it yet either, but I had my crew keep rolling, because 30 years of following that sound had taught me that when a proud man taps a quiet one and the quiet one only looks at him, you do not pack up your camera, you wait. The clip was online before the auction closed. That is the world we live in now, and Kwan Deveraux understood the world we live in now better than the palace did, better than the Veterans Fund did, better, God knows, than I wanted to admit. His camerawoman had it cut and captioned and out on his brand's channel inside 40 minutes. The tap, the "there's nobody home in there," the 200,000, the guardsman's stone face ringed in red with a single word stamped across it: statue. By the time the gala's own tasteful highlight reel went up, hours later, all soft strings and grateful veterans, Deveraux's version had 1 million views and a life of its own, and the life of its own was ugly. I watched it climb from a corner of the hall while the auction wound down, and I felt the particular sickness of a person whose trade is telling stories, watching a story be stolen and rewritten in real time by a man with a bigger channel. The caption did the work. Statue. The comments did the rest. Half a kingdom that had walked past those guards for 2 centuries without a thought suddenly had a fierce opinion about their courage. And the opinion was that the palace kept a row of frightened men in fur hats who would rather let wounded soldiers go unfunded than risk a bruise. There was a poll. There was a second cut, slowed down, with a fight analyst's voiceover explaining that you could see the guards' fear in the freeze response. Look at the stillness. That's a man locked up. Which was so exactly backwards that I laughed out loud alone, and a waiter looked at me strangely. Because I had seen the eyes come down off the wall. I had seen the read. Whatever that stillness was, it was not a freeze. But I could not prove it, and a thing you cannot prove is no defense at all against a clip with 1 million views, and I went home that night with a bad feeling in my stomach that had nothing to do with the salmon. I want to tell you about the next 3 days from where I stood, because I was not inside the palace and I will not pretend I was. I am a reporter. I chase. What I chased over those 3 days was the story of Kwan Deveraux versus a man whose name I did not yet know. And the chasing is how I learned the thing that turned the whole affair. So let me lay it out the way it came to me, in the order it came, because the order matters. The first thing I did was try to get the guard's name, and I could not. The palace press office, a careful woman named Mrs. Carroll, who returned my call with the wary courtesy of someone who has said no comment to better journalists than me, would confirm only that the guardsman conducted himself entirely in accordance with his duty and the standards of the regiment. She would not give me a name. She would not give me a rank. She would not, when I pushed, gently, I liked her, give me anything at all except a single sentence that I wrote down and underlined twice, and did not understand until much later. "Miss Astrid," she said, "I'd caution you against assuming the palace is the party in danger here." And she hung up, and I sat looking at the sentence, because in 20 years of prying quotes out of press offices, I had never once had one warn me off a story by suggesting I had the victim backwards. The second thing I did was watch every fight Kwan Deveraux had ever posted, because if I could not get at the guard, I could at least get at the champion, and a fighter tells you everything about himself if you watch enough of him. I watched 31 fights. And here is what I found, and it took me 2 days and a lot of coffee to see it because it is the kind of thing that hides in plain sight. Kwan Deveraux had never, not once in a decade of promoted bouts, fought a genuine grappler. He was a striker, a beautiful and terrible striker, and every opponent his people had ever matched him with was another striker, or a brawler, or a man who would stand in front of him and trade. Which is to say, every opponent had agreed by stepping into that particular ring to fight the champion's fight. The one style he had spent his entire career carefully never facing was the one that does not trade, that does not stand in front of you, that closes the distance and takes your balance and puts you gently and inarguably on the floor. I did not think much of it at the time. I filed it. It was a fight nerd's footnote. It became, 3 days later, the whole ballgame. The third thing I did, and this is the one that cracked it open, was go looking for anyone who had ever trained Kwan Deveraux, because a champion is built by other men, and the other men remember things the champion has decided to forget. That is how I found Overheard. He ran a boxing and grappling gym in an unfashionable part of the city, up a flight of stairs over a hardware shop, the kind of gym that smells of 40 years of honest sweat and has photographs on the wall gone brown at the edges. He was 71, built like a retired bull, with a flattened old fighter's nose and hands that had clearly been broken and reset more than once, and he had, 30 years before, run the fight commission that sanctioned amateur bouts across the whole of the Eastern realm. He had also, it turned out, been the man who gave a 15-year-old Kwan Deveraux his first real coaching before the boy went pro and left the little gyms behind. I went to ask him about the champion. I sat down across a scarred desk with 2 cups of coffee thicker than tar, and I mentioned the gala and the clip and the guard, and I said the word statue, repeating Deveraux's caption, and Overheard went very still. "Show me," he said. I showed him the clip on my phone. He watched it once, the tap, the taunt, the guardsman's stone face. He did not laugh. He watched it a second time, and on the second time he did a thing I did not understand. He was not watching the champion at all. He was watching the guard. He held the phone very close to his old eyes, and he froze it, clumsily, on the half-second I have told you about. The half-second where Elias Marrow's eyes came down off the wall to touch the champion's collar and hands. And Overheard looked at that frame for a long, long time in a silence that started to make the back of my neck prickle. Then he set the phone down on the desk, very carefully, the way you set down a thing you have just realized is loaded. "Miss Astrid," he said, and his voice had gone rough. "Do you know who that guardsman is?" "No, the palace won't say. Nobody will say." The old man looked at the frozen frame on my phone, and then at me, and something moved across his broken old face that I can only describe as awe, 30 years old and still fresh. "I do," said Overheard. "God help that stupid, arrogant boy. I know exactly who that is." I want to be honest about my failings as a reporter here, because I nearly ruined the best story of my life by wanting it too much. I leaned across that scarred desk and I said, "Who? Give me the name. I'll run it tonight." And Overheard looked at me the way a man looks at someone who has offered to sell something that isn't theirs, and he pulled the phone an inch further out of my reach. "No," he said, "you'll do no such thing. Sit down, drink your coffee, and I'll tell you why." So I sat, and I drank the coffee, which was terrible, and I listened. And this is what the old commission man told me across the top of that desk, while the afternoon went gold in the dirty windows of a gym over a hardware shop. I have checked as much of it as could be checked in the days since. All of it held. 30 years ago, said Overheard, Before your champion was born, the army of this kingdom kept a school, not the kind you're thinking of, not marching and saluting. A small, quiet school for the men who went into the bad places, the mountains, the border country, the wrecks, the search and rescue, and whether that kills, the men who had to be able to fight for their lives in the dark with no weapon and no light and no one coming. They needed the very best hand-to-hand teacher the realm could find, because when those men failed, they failed alone and they died alone. And so the school did not care about medals or sport or looking good on a card. It cared about one thing only, bringing men home from places that eat men. And the man they found to teach it, the man they built the whole school around for the better part of 20 years, was the finest close-quarters instructor this kingdom has ever produced. I sat on the commission that certified his methods for the regular army. I have watched in this life perhaps 4 men move the way he moved. He was one of them. And I am telling you, Miss Astrid, on the eyes of my dead mother, that the man on your phone in the fur hat, the one your champion poked in the chest and called a statue on national television, that is him. I said something clumsy about being sure, about it being 30 years, about old men and old memories. Overheard did not get angry. He got sad, which was worse. I taught your champion to throw a jab when he was 15, he said. I taught a lot of boys to throw a jab. And some of the ones with real gifts, the ones who might go far, I sent quietly, on my own authority as a commissioned man who'd earned a favor or two, to a 2-week open clinic that instructor used to run once a year for civilian coaches, to raise a little money for the rescue units. Best 2 weeks of my life, both times I went. And I sent young Kwan Deveraux to it. He was 19. He was already too proud to learn, but I sent him, because he was gifted and I hoped it would humble him. The old man's mouth twisted. It did not humble him. He spent the whole fortnight sulking in the back because the little gray man at the front kept putting him on the floor without appearing to try, in front of everyone, and Kwan Deveraux does not like being on the floor. He left early. He told people afterward the clinic was a waste, that the instructor was overrated, that grappling was for men who couldn't punch. Farron tapped my phone, the frozen frame. He looked that man in the eye for 2 weeks when he was 19, and he learned nothing, and he forgot the face. And now he's poked him in the chest on television and offered to fight him for charity. And he does not know, he genuinely does not know, I'd stake this gym on it, that he is challenging the one man alive who already put him on the floor 100 times and could do it 100 more before breakfast. I sat there with the terrible coffee going cold in my hand, and the whole shape of the thing rearranging itself in front of me. And I understood, finally, what Mrs. Caro at the palace had meant. I'd caution you against assuming the palace is the party in danger here. She knew. Of course she knew. The palace knew exactly who was under the bearskin, and the palace was not worried about its guard's dignity. The palace was worried, if it was worried about anything, about what its guard was capable of, and about a proud young champion strolling toward a cliff in the dark with a smile on his face and a camera crew filming his approach. Why is a man like that standing at a charity gala in a fur hat? I asked. It was the obvious question. Why isn't he, I don't know, running the school, a general somewhere? Overheard was quiet for a while. Then he said, "You'd have to ask him." I heard he came out of the service the hard way, a rescue that went wrong in the high country, a lot of good men that didn't come home, and him carrying it. I heard he couldn't teach any more after, couldn't stand at the front of a room and send young men off to learn the thing that had cost him so much. I heard the palace took him on when nobody else could reach him, that standing a post, quiet, useful, guarding people who'd never know what he was the only work that let him sleep. He shrugged his big old shoulders. That's what I heard. It might be gossip, but I'll tell you what isn't gossip, Miss Astrid, and it's the thing I want you to hold on to while your champion runs his mouth for the next 3 days. A man who taught the deadliest work there is, for 20 years, and then walked away from it because the cost of it broke something in him, that is not a man who's forgotten how. That is a man who has decided, every single morning since, not to. And there is nothing on this earth harder to provoke than someone who has already made the hardest decision of his life and made it stick. Your champion thinks he's poking a statue. He's poking the one man in the kingdom who knows exactly what he could do and has spent 30 years choosing not to. The old man pushed my phone back across the desk. Pray he keeps choosing. I left Overheard's gym with the story of my career in my notebook and absolutely no way to run it, because I had a name I could not confirm through any channel that would print, a palace that would not speak, and a source who had made me swear on his dead mother that I would not put the guardsman's identity in the world before the guardsman chose to. I kept the oath. I want that on the record too, because it was the hardest professional thing I have ever done, and it was, it turned out, the only decent thing available to me, and decency is not always available. And while I was keeping it, Kwan Deveraux spent those same 3 days doing the exact opposite of keeping anything. He could not let it go. That is the thing about a man who has built himself out of noise. He cannot survive a silence, because the silence starts him wondering what is underneath the noise, and Kwan Deveraux had spent his whole life making very sure he never had to find out. The guard's stillness had starved him. The clip had gone huge, yes, but the guard had not answered, and a champion needs his opponent to answer, needs the flinch, the tremor, the crack, and Elias Marrow had given him a wall, and the wall was eating at Deveraux from the inside in a way I do not think he understood. So he escalated. Day 2 he posted a video from his gym, him on the pads, fast and vicious, genuinely frightening to watch, cut over a voiceover about respect being earned in here, not handed out with a costume. Day 3 he raised the purse. He went on a morning show, all charm and open collar, and he pledged $500,000 to the Veterans Fund, if the King's Brave Guard would meet him in a proper sanctioned exhibition, and he named a date, that coming Saturday, and he named a place. The very charity fight card his Apex Rain brand was already promoting in a hall across the river, and he framed the whole thing as generosity, as him doing the palace a favor, giving their frightened statue a chance to become a hero for the wounded lads. It was masterful and it was poison, and by Saturday morning the whole kingdom was arguing about whether the King's Guard would show, and the Veterans Fund. This was the part that made me want to throw my phone in the river. The Veterans Fund had become the hostage in a hostage video. $500,000 real dollars for real wounded people dangling off the end of one proud man's need to make a quiet man move. And the palace still said nothing. Mrs. Carroll's line held, conducted himself entirely in accordance with his duty. No name, no rank, no answer. I did not think the guard would come. Everything I knew about those men said he could not, that he was forbidden the ring, the leave, the spectacle, all of it, and that the whole point of him was that he would stand his wall and let the noise burn itself out. That is what the discipline demanded, and I had learned enough in 3 days to respect the discipline. So when my editor called on Saturday morning and told me to get across the river to the Apex Rain card, because there's a whisper the palace is sending someone, I told her she had it wrong, that the palace would never, that it wasn't how those men worked. I was across the river in 40 minutes anyway. You do not, in my trade, bet against your own bad feeling. The Apex Rain card was in a converted riverside hall, 6,000 seats, the kind of venue that smells of hot lights and cold beer, and the particular electricity of people who have paid to watch other people get hurt. It was a charity night in name, a portion to the veterans, banners everywhere saying so, but it was a Deveraux production down to the last light cue, and the whole building had come to see whether the King's Guard would appear, because Deveraux had spent 3 days promising he would not, which is a promoter's oldest trick. Swear the thing won't happen so loudly that everyone buys a ticket to see if it does. I got a place at the press table with my crew, and I watched the undercard, and I did not believe, right up until the moment it happened, that the palace would ever let it happen. Then between the 4th bout and the main event, the arena lights dropped, and a single door at the back of the hall opened, and through it, alone, in the full red tunic and the tall black bearskin and the white gloves, walked guardsman Elias Marrow. The sound the crowd made is a sound I have only heard a few times in my life, at the very biggest fights, when something arrives that the room was not sure was real. 6,000 people came up out of their seats at once. Every phone in the building rose. And through all of it the guardsman walked down the long aisle toward the ring at a slow, even measured pace. Not a fighter's stalk, not a showman's strut, just the walk of a man crossing a courtyard to a post, exactly as if the 6,000 roaring people were whether he had decided not to acknowledge. And I remember thinking, this is wrong. This breaks every rule I was told those men live by. The palace would never. And then I saw the second figure walking a half step behind him and to the side. And I understood that the palace had not broken its rules at all. It had done something far cleverer. The second man was in a plain dark suit. I recognized him. He was the man from the high table at the gala, the one the prince consort had leaned over to, the one who had risen and slipped out the side door. He walked behind the guardsman with the quiet, total authority of a person who does not need to raise his voice, and when they reached the ring apron he stepped up first, and he took the microphone from a stunned announcer, and he said, in a level carrying voice, the thing that changed the entire nature of the night. "Good evening. My name is not important. I speak for the royal household." The hall went quiet fast. A household voice does that. 3 nights ago, a challenge was issued to a member of the King's Guard in public at a charity event, and money for wounded veterans was attached to it. The household has considered the matter carefully, and the household wishes to be very clear about what is, and is not, happening here tonight. He let that sit. He was good. He was very good. There will be no fight. A ripple of disappointment, of confusion. He rode over it. The King's Guard does not fight for sport or for spectacle or to satisfy a challenge. That is not what these men are, and no amount of money and no size of crowd will make it what they are. Guardsman Marrow is not here to fight Mr. Deveraux. He turned, slightly, toward where Kwan Deveraux stood at the far side of the ring in his fighting gear, and for the first time all week I saw the champion's grin look uncertain. He is here for one reason only. Mr. Deveraux pledged $500,000 to the Veterans Fund, publicly, conditional on a guardsman appearing. A guardsman has appeared. The household expects Mr. Deveraux to honor his pledge, tonight, in full, on camera, and then this circus is over, and these men can go back to the wall where they do their real work, which none of you have ever bothered to look at. It was, I thought, brilliant. The palace had found the door in the box after all. They would not fight. They would simply show up, call the bluff, collect the money for the veterans, and leave with the moral high ground and the champion's $500,000. The guard would never have to raise a hand. The discipline would hold. I actually felt my shoulders come down. I thought it was over. It was not over. I had made the same mistake the palace had almost made. The mistake of thinking that a man like Kwan Deveraux could be beaten by a clever maneuver, when the truth is that a man built entirely out of pride cannot lose in front of a crowd, cannot be seen to be outplayed, would rather burn down the whole hall than be handed a graceful exit that everyone can see is a graceful exit. The household man had left the champion a way to save face, pay the money, look generous, walk away. And Kwan Deveraux, standing in his own ring in front of 6,000 of his own paying customers, having promised them ruin, could not take it. He took the microphone from the ring announcer himself. He was smiling again, but it was the wrong smile, the tight one, the animal underneath it very awake now. "That's beautiful," he said. "That's really beautiful. The palace sends a man in a suit to tell me my own fight is cancelled and to please pay up like a good boy." The crowd, his crowd, laughed, and the laugh fed him and steadied him. Here's the thing, though. Here's the thing nobody in a suit wants to say out loud. He walked to the ropes nearest the guardsman, who stood on the arena floor below, still, hands at his sides, looking up at him with that same patient, sorrowful attention I had seen at the gala. "I'll pay the $500,000, gladly. I've got it right here, wired and ready, and every one of those wounded lads is going to get every cent. That's a promise from me to them, and it's got nothing to do with the palace." Applause, real applause. The man knew exactly when to be sincere. But I didn't come here to write a check. I came here because 3 nights ago I put my hand on this man's chest and asked him to show me there was somebody home, and he gave me nothing. And a suit telling me the guard's too special to fight doesn't answer my question. It ducks it. He crouched down at the ropes, level with the guardsman now, and he dropped his voice, though the microphone still caught it and the whole hall leaned in. "So I'll make you a new deal, soldier. Forget the fight. Forget the ring, the gloves, the referee, all of it. I don't need 30 seconds. I need 10. Right there on the floor where you're standing. You don't have to throw a single punch. You just have to stop me from putting you down. That's all. 10 seconds. Keep your feet for 10 seconds and I'll pledge another $500,000 on top. $1 million total for the veterans. And I'll go on every channel in the kingdom and say the King's Guard is everything they say and more." He smiled his tight, terrible smile. "Or you stand there like a statue and let a suit answer for you, and every wounded man in this country watches the palace's finest refuse to spend 10 seconds standing up for himself. Your choice. But this time you make it, not the man in the suit." And there it was, the game changed. He had taken away the palace's clever exit. He had made it not about a fight, which the guard could righteously refuse, but about the smallest, most humiliatingly minimal thing imaginable. Just stay on your feet, just don't fall down, just prove the stillness is strength and not fear. And he had doubled the veterans' money on top of it, and he had done it directly to the guardsman, cutting the household man out, forcing Elias Marrow himself to answer with his own body or be answered for. The household man stepped in fast, hand up, mouth already opening to refuse it, and I watched him do the sensible thing, the disciplined thing, the thing the whole edifice was built to do: say no, collect the $500,000 already pledged, leave. It was the right call. It was Drummond's call, if you'll forgive me borrowing a name from a story you don't know. And I watched it fail in real time, because of a thing none of us in that hall could see except, perhaps, the guardsman himself. Elias Marrow lifted one white glove, a small gesture. It stopped the household man mid-word. And then guardsman Elias Marrow spoke for the first time in this entire affair. The first words anyone had heard from him, low, even, carrying farther in the sudden silence than all of Deveraux' amplified noise. And what he said was not to the champion, and it was not to the crowd. It was to the man in the suit. "Sir," he said, "with respect, he's right about one thing. This one's mine to answer. I have thought a great deal since about what it cost that man to say those 7 words, because I did not understand them at the time and I understand them now. He was not agreeing to fight. He was not taking Deveraux' bait, not exactly. He was doing something much stranger and much harder, and it took me weeks and a second conversation with Overheard to see it. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you what happened in the hall, and then I'll tell you what I learned about why." The household man did not look happy. He leaned down and said something to the guardsman, low and urgent, and the guardsman answered him, and whatever passed between them lasted perhaps 10 seconds, and at the end of it the household man straightened and his face had closed and he stepped back. He did not leave. He positioned himself at the edge of the arena floor and he watched, and I understood that he had extracted some promise, drawn some line, and that the guardsman had given his word on it, and that the household man trusted the word enough to let it happen and distrusted the situation enough to stand there ready to end it. I would learn later what the line was. It mattered enormously. But in the moment all I saw was a man in a suit step back and a champion in the ring grin like he'd won. "He speaks," Deveraux crowed up and pacing now, delighted, restored, the animal fed at last. "Ladies and gentlemen, the statue has a voice. Get down here then, soldier. 10 seconds, right here." He vaulted the ropes and dropped to the arena floor, light and fast and horribly capable, and I felt the whole press table tense around me, because a champion out of the ring and on the floor is a different animal than a champion in it, And this was going to happen on the bare boards in front of 6,000 people with no ropes and no referee and no bell. Just a full-contact champion and a man in a fur hat. Now, here is where I have to slow down, because here is where I almost got it wrong, the same way the crowd got it wrong, the same way you might be getting it wrong right now if you're imagining what came next as a fight. It was not a fight. Nothing that happened on that floor was a fight. But before I show it to you, I have to give you the thing Overheard told me later, because without it the 10 seconds are just a spectacle, and with it they are the truest thing I ever put on film. I went back to Farron's gym the week after. I had to. I had watched the thing with my own eyes and my own cameras, and I still did not fully understand what I had seen, and there was exactly one man alive who could explain it. I climbed the stairs over the hardware shop and I sat down across the scarred desk again, and I said, "Tell me what he did, frame by frame, because I've watched my own footage 40 times and I can't make it make sense." And the old commission man, who had trained the champion at 15 and watched the instructor for 2 weeks at a clinic 30 years before, told me the thing that is the heart of this whole story, and I am going to give it to you the way he gave it to me, because it is the reason any of it matters. There are 2 ways to answer a man who wants to hurt you, Overheard said. The first way, the way almost everyone knows, is to hurt him back faster, harder first. That's the whole of what the sport is. That's what your champion is, top to bottom, a machine for hurting men back faster and harder and first, and he's magnificent at it. I won't take that from him. The old man turned a cold cup of coffee a quarter turn on the desk. But there's a second way, and it's the one they taught in that quiet school in the mountains, and it's 1,000 times harder, and there are maybe 4 men in the kingdom who ever truly had it. The second way is to take away the man's ability to hurt you completely, gently, without hurting him at all, and to do it so plainly that he understands in his body before his pride can argue that you could have hurt him and chose not to. You don't beat him. You unmake him. You take the fight out of his hands like taking a toy from a tired child, and you set him down somewhere he can't get up angry from, and you never once close your fist. Farron looked at me, and the awe was back in his old broken face. That's what a rescue man does, you understand. That's the whole art of it. He doesn't fight the drowning man. The drowning man is twice as strong and half as sane, and if you fight him you both die. He controls him. He takes his balance and his leverage and his options, all of them gently, and he brings him home alive whether the fool wants to come or not. That instructor spent 20 years teaching men to do that in the dark, in freezing water on a cliff, with their own lives on the line. Your champion offered him 10 seconds on a flat, dry floor in good light with nothing at stake but pride. The old man barked a laugh with no humor in it at all. "Miss Astrid, that was not a contest. That was a master being asked, very rudely, to demonstrate the one thing he spent his whole life becoming the best in the world at. The only question was whether he'd do it kindly." But I did not have any of that yet, standing at the press table with my heart in my mouth. I had a champion crouched on the balls of his feet on the bare floor, and a guardsman standing before him in a red tunic and a bearskin, hands at his sides, white gloves, perfectly still, and 6,000 people holding one enormous breath, and my own crew whispering, "Are you getting this? Are you getting this?" in my ear. And then, before it began, a thing happened that I have never forgotten, a thing that Deveraux's cameras cut out of their version, and that I have kept in mind ever since as the whole moral of the affair. Guardsman Elias Marrow reached up slowly, and he took off the bearskin. He did it with both hands carefully, the way you handle something that matters, and he turned and held it out to the side, and a younger guardsman I had not even noticed. There had been a second one, posted quietly by the door the whole time, and I only saw him now stepped forward and took it. And the reason it mattered, the reason I keep it in the film, is this. The bearskin is the costume. The bearskin is the thing Deveraux had been mocking for 3 days, the fur, the hat, the decoration. And by taking it off and handing it away before he did anything at all, Elias Marrow was saying, without a word, to the champion and the crowd and the cameras and the kingdom, "This is not the guard answering you. The guard doesn't fight. This is the man." And the man had a face now, an ordinary gray-templed weathered face, 50-some years old, calm as still water. And he looked at Kwan Deveraux across 4 feet of bare floor with no fur and no rifle and no hat and nothing at all between them. And he said the second and last thing he said that whole night, quiet, almost kind. "10 seconds then, whenever you're ready, son." Son, he called the champion son. And I saw Kwan Deveraux hear it, and I saw the animal under his grin flatten its ears, because you do not call a man son unless you have decades on him in the only way that counts, and some very old part of the champion, the 19-year-old who had sulked in the back of a clinic and forgotten a gray little man's face, stirred at the word and did not know why. Then Deveraux, because he was who he was, because the only thing worse than the fear was admitting the fear was real, shook it off and came. I have the footage. I have watched the footage more times than any sane person should. And I am going to describe the 10 seconds to you exactly as they happened, because the crowd in that hall did not understand what they were seeing while they saw it, and neither did I, and neither, most of all, did Kwan Deveraux, and the not understanding is the whole point. He came fast. He came the way champions come, with a feint first, a flick of the lead hand to draw the guard's attention high, and then the real thing behind it, a driving shoulder and a grab, because Deveraux was not, whatever his crowd wanted, actually going to punch a king's guard in the face on camera. Even he knew where the line was. He was going to grab the man and muscle him down, put him on the boards, hold him there, prove the statue could be toppled. It was the sensible attack. It was the attack of a stronger, younger, faster man who intends to use all 3 advantages at once. He drove in low and hard with both hands reaching for the guardsman's tunic to take hold and throw. And Elias Marrow was not there. I do not mean he leapt aside. There was nothing so dramatic as a leap. I mean that in the space of the champion's committed rush, the guardsman made a single small movement, a turn, a shift of 1 foot, no wider than a man stepping to let someone pass in a doorway, and the grab that was meant to catch a fistful of red wool closed instead on nothing, on air, and Deveraux's own driving weight, all of that beautiful trained committed momentum, carried him forward past the place the guard had been. Exactly the way the drowning man's lunge carries him past the rescuer who has already slipped his grasp. And then the guardsman's white gloves were on him, not striking. I watched it 40 times to be sure, and I will swear it in any court. Not one strike, not one blow, not one closed fist in the entire 10 seconds. What the gloves did was take hold, one at the champion's driving wrist, one flat against his shoulder, and turn his momentum a few degrees off its line, downward, the way you would guide a heavy door that someone had shoved too hard, and use the strength Deveraux himself had put into the rush to fold him gently forward and down, so that the champion's own force, redirected, took him toward the floor he had been so eager to put the guard on. Deveraux was too good to simply fall. He fought it, of course he fought it. He was a champion. He twisted and drove and tried to rip free and reset. And this is the part that undid him, the part that undid the whole crowd, because every single thing he did to escape only handed the guardsman more to work with. He pulled, the guard let the pull become a pivot. He drove, the guard let the drive become a stumble. He was a man of enormous strength and speed, pouring both, at maximum, into a surface that would not resist him and would not strike him, and simply, endlessly, calmly turned everything he gave into a further loss of his own balance. Ovid Farron's words. You take his balance and his leverage and his options, all of them, gently. I watched a full-contact champion throw the full contents of himself at Elias Marrow for perhaps 8 seconds, and I watched Elias Marrow answer every ounce of it with a redirection so economical it looked, on the tape, almost lazy, and at the end of the 8 seconds Kwan Deveraux was face down on the bare floor with one white glove resting, not gripping, not wrenching, just resting, at the back of his shoulder. held in a control so complete and so soft that the guardsman could have released it at any instant, and the champion knew, his body knew, that he could not stand up out of it, could not turn, could not do one single thing except lie there and understand. The whole hall had gone silent. 6,000 people who had come to watch a fight had watched, instead, a thing they had no word for, and the silence was the sound of a crowd trying to find the word. Elias Marrow held the control for perhaps 2 seconds, long enough, not 1 instant longer. And then he let go completely, opened both gloves, took his hands off the man entirely, and he stepped back, and he stood up straight, hands returning to his sides, breathing no harder than a man who has walked up a single flight of stairs. And he waited for Kwan Deveraux to get up in his own time and with his own dignity, which was the most merciful thing I have ever seen one man do to another, and which the champion on the floor understood. Because here is the thing about that ending, the thing that separates it from every knockout I have ever filmed. There was no injury, there was no blood, there was no moment of the crowd baying at a hurt man. There was only a champion, unmarked, physically unharmed, lifting himself up off a floor he had been put on without a single blow, in front of 6,000 people and every camera in the kingdom. And the injury, the only injury of the whole affair, was the one no camera could show, the one happening behind Kwan Deveraux' eyes as he rose, the collapse of the single belief his entire life had been built on, that he was the most dangerous thing in the room. He got to his feet slowly. He did not lunge again. Some men, humiliated, would have swung wild, and I braced for it, and the household man at the edge of the floor came half a step forward for it. But Deveraux did not. Whatever else the man was, he had spent his life around real danger, and the animal in him that he had refused to listen to for 3 days finally had the floor, and it was telling him the truth in a voice too loud to ignore. You are alive because he decided you would be. That control at your shoulder could have been anything. He chose that it be nothing. And the champion stood there on the bare boards, chest heaving, staring at the calm gray-templed man who had not even lost his breath. And I watched Kwan Deveraux do the arithmetic that his pride had refused to do for 3 days and arrive, at last, at the answer, and go pale. "I know you," he said. It was not amplified. The microphone had been dropped somewhere in the rush, but the hall was so silent that it carried anyway, and my crew's boom caught it clean. 3 words in a voice I had not heard from Kwan Deveraux all week, small and young and afraid, and about 30 years too late. "I know you," he said again, and his hand came up halfway to his own mouth. "The clinic, you ran the clinic, the mountains. I was 19. You put me on the floor 20 times in a day, and I told everyone you were overrated." His face was doing something terrible now, the grin gone, the showman gone, a man watching his whole life reorganize itself around a fact he had buried and mocked and forgotten. "You're my instructor's instructor. Everyone I ever learned from you. Oh God." He looked around the silent hall, at the 6,000 faces, at the cameras, and the full size of it landed on him all at once. "I challenged, I put my hand on your chest and called you a statue, on television. For 3 days And Elias Marrow, who had not spoken since he called the man son, spoke for the last time that night, and he did not raise his voice, and there was in it no triumph at all, only the same patient, sorrowful kindness I had seen in his eyes at the very first tap in the great riding hall, 3 days and a whole world ago. "I know," he said. "I knew you the moment you touched my chest. You had a good jab at 19. You still lead with your shoulder when you're frightened." He let that sit, a small mercy dressed as a coaching note, one professional to another, the only language the champion had ever been able to hear. "You didn't have to become this to be dangerous, son. You were already dangerous. You became this because being dangerous stopped being enough, and you needed everyone to see it all the time forever. I know the feeling. I taught men who had it. The ones who beat it were the ones who found something worth being still for." He glanced once at the young guardsman holding his bearskin by the door, then back at Deveraux. Pay the veterans what you promised, all of it. And then go home and ask yourself what you're so afraid of that you had to come all this way to make a quiet man prove he could hurt you. A pause. He never wanted to. That's the part you couldn't see. That's the part that's under the fur. He turned then and he walked back to the young guardsman by the door, and he took the bearskin, and he put it back on with both hands, carefully. And the moment it settled onto his head, the man was gone again, and the guard was back, eyes level, hands at his sides. A decoration in a fur hat, exactly as Kwan Deveraux had described him 3 days before, except that now 6,000 people and a kingdom of cameras had seen what the decoration was, and no one would ever be able to unsee it. And the household man in the dark suit stepped up beside him, and the two of them, the guard and the suit, turned and walked back up the long aisle toward the door they had come in through. At that same slow, measured courtyard pace, through a silence that held all the way to the door and then broke, behind them, into a sound I will not try to name, because it was not a cheer and it was not applause and it was not the sound 6,000 people make at the end of a fight. It was something else. It was the sound of a very large number of people all understanding the same thing at the same time and being moved by it, and not quite knowing what to do with themselves. I have heard crowds roar 1,000 times. I had never heard a crowd do that, and I have not heard it since. I want to tell you the rest of it properly, because a story like this earns its ending or it doesn't, and I have spent my whole career watching stories not earn theirs. Kwan Deveraux honored the pledge, all of it, not the 500,000, the full million, the doubled sum, the amount he had dangled as bait for the guard to stay on his feet 10 seconds, which the guard had done and considerably more. He honored it that same night on camera before he left the ring, and then he did a thing no one asked him to do and no promoter's instinct would ever have advised. He took the microphone back up off the floor, and he stood in the center of his own ring in front of his own paying crowd, and he told the truth about himself out loud. 3 nights ago I put my hand on that man's chest and called him a statue, he said. His voice was not the champion's voice anymore. It cracked twice and he let it. I said he'd never been hit, never been tested, that the discipline would go out of him like air out of a balloon. I want every single one of you to hear me say this, because I said the other thing to all of you and it's only fair. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. I was the only frightened man on that floor tonight. I've been the only frightened man in every room I've walked into for 10 years, and I've been so loud about it that none of you could tell, and I couldn't either. That man could have hurt me any way he wanted and he chose not to, and then he told me to go home and figure out what I'm afraid of. So I'm going to. He looked around the hall at the cameras and he said the last of it quietly. His name, and I'm only saying this because I think the kingdom should know, and because I owe him at least this, his name is Guardsman Elias Marrow, and 30 years ago, before most of you were born, he built the school that taught the men who taught the men who taught me. Everything I know how to do, he was doing better before my father met my mother. And he's been standing at a wall this whole time, guarding people who never knew, letting the likes of me walk past and never saying a word. That's not a statue. That's the most dangerous man I've ever stood in front of, choosing every single day to be the gentlest. I don't have a word for that. But I know it's the opposite of what I am, and I'd like to spend what's left of my career trying to earn one. I filmed all of it. It ran the next morning, my footage, my cut, the true version instead of the statue version, and for once in this business the true version won, because the true version had the champion himself narrating his own undoing, and there is no argument against that. The clip of the tap in the great riding hall, nobody home in there, is there, got buried under the clip of a man learning who he was, and that is the only kind of justice the format ever offers, that it can turn as hard the other way when the truth finally gets its hands on the wheel. But I have left out the most important thing, and I only learned it later, and it is the thing that has stayed with me longest, so I will end on it. I went back to the palace press office a week after, to try one more time for an interview with Elias Marrow, and Mrs. Carrow, who had warned me at the start not to assume the palace was the party in danger, met me for a coffee. She would not let me record. She would not give me the interview. Marrow, she said, had declined it, would decline all of them, had asked only to be allowed to go back to his post and be left alone, which the palace intended to honor, because honoring exactly that request was the whole reason he was able to do the work at all. But she told me two things off the record that I have permission now to tell, because enough time has passed and because she said the guardsman himself, when asked, said, "Let her tell it if she'll tell it true." The first was about the household man in the dark suit, and the line he had drawn before he stepped back and let the 10 seconds happen. When he leaned down and spoke urgently to the guardsman on the arena floor, what he had said was, "No strike, no injury, no matter what, you have my authority to control him and nothing else, and if his life is not in danger and you close a single fist, I will end your service that night." And what Elias Marrow had answered, the promise the household man trusted enough to step back on, was, "Sir, if I were going to close my fist, I'd have done it 30 years ago to a great many worse men than this one. And I didn't, and that's the only reason you let me stand your wall." And the household man had believed him, because it was in the file, the real file, the one 4 people in the kingdom had read, that the most decorated thing Elias Marrow had ever done was a thing he had chosen not to do, on a mountain in the dark, when doing it would have been easy and defensible, and would have cost him nothing but a soul he had decided to keep. The second thing Mrs. Carrow told me was the story of the mountain, and I am going to tell it plainly and briefly, the way she told it, because it is not mine to dress up and because its plainness is the point. Late in his years running the quiet school, Elias Marrow had led a rescue into the high country after a spring storm caught a party of climbers and a search team both, and turned a hard night into a catastrophe. There is no clean version of what happened up there, and Mrs. Carrow did not offer me one. Men Marrow had trained, men he loved, went out into weather that should have turned them back, because he had taught them they could survive things that in truth no one can survive, and some of them did not come home. He brought the living down on his back, one after another, across 2 days, and he went up a last time for the ones who were not living, because leaving them was not a thing the man he had made himself could do, and it nearly finished him. When it was over, he could not teach any more. He stood at the front of the room a month later to send a new class off to learn the thing that had cost him so much, and he found he could not open his mouth, could not send one more young man toward that mountain, and he understood that the instructor was dead even though the man was still breathing. So he took off the one uniform and he could not wear it again, and for a while, Mrs. Carrow said, there was real fear for him among the few who knew, the way there is fear for any man who has carried more than a man can carry and set it down with nowhere to put it. It was the old queen's household, Saralin's mother's people, in the years before Saraland herself came to the throne, that found a place for him at a wall, not out of charity. Out of exactly the reason mercy that the good houses are capable of when they remember what they are for. Here is a man who has spent his life bringing others home and cannot go home himself. Give him a post where his whole enormous dangerous stillness is not a burden but the entire job. Let him guard people who will never know what he is, because the not being known is the medicine, and let the standing still be the thing that lets him sleep. And it worked. For years it worked. A man who could not bear to teach the deadly thing anymore had found the one place in the kingdom where the deadliest man alive was asked to do nothing all day, but be gentle and watchful and still, and be thanked for it by no one, and want nothing more. And then a champion in an open-collared suit had walked up to that wall and put 2 fingers on his chest and asked him on camera to prove there was somebody home. "You understand now," Mrs. Carrow said to me, "why I told you not to assume the palace was in danger. We were never afraid for the guard. We were afraid for the boy. And most of all," she turned her cup on the saucer, and I thought of Ovid Farron doing the exact same thing with his cold coffee, Two old people who had both watched the same rare thing walk through their lives. Most of all, we were afraid for Marrow. Not that he would lose. That he would win, and that the winning would wake the thing the wall had finally let him lay down. That is what the household man was really guarding on that floor. Not the champion's safety, not the palace's reputation, Marrow's peace. The whole of it, the no strike, the control and nothing else, the promise, that was us trying to protect the one man in that hall who did not need protecting from the champion, and did need protecting from what the champion might dig back up. And did it, I asked, wake it? Mrs. Carrow was quiet for a moment, then she almost smiled. You saw him hand off the bearskin before and take it back after. You saw him put it back on with both hands. She looked at me. He came back to himself the moment it was done and asked to return to his post that same night. He slept, they tell me. He's at the wall now. Whatever the champion dug at, the man had already buried it too deep and too well, 30 years deep, one still morning at a time. He didn't need us on that floor after all. She stood, gathering her coat. But I'm glad we were there. You don't leave a man alone on a mountain, Miss Astrid, even a man who's the best in the world at coming down them by himself, especially not him. I have one more thing to tell you, and then I am done, because it is the thing that made me sit in my car outside the palace press office for 20 minutes not driving anywhere, and it is the reason I have told this story straight and slow instead of cutting it for clicks the way my whole trade would have me cut it. I asked Mrs. Carrow at the door whether the Queen had seen it. The gala challenge, 3 nights before, had happened in Her Majesty's own hall, at Her Majesty's own table. I had watched the Prince Consort lean and murmur and send the household man out. I wanted to know what the crown had made of it. Mrs. Carrow paused with her hand on the door, and she decided something, and she gave me the last piece. Queen Silen saw all of it, she said. The tap, the challenge, the money hung round the veterans' necks, she saw it happen at her own table, and she was, I will tell you, very angry, though you would never have known it from her face. She is not a woman who lets a room see her anger. She wanted to stop it that night in the hall. It was the Prince Consort who counseled patience, and the household man who said quietly that he thought Guardsman Marrow would want to answer it himself in his own time, in his own way, and that the kindest thing the crown could do was make certain he had the room to. So they gave him the room. She looked at me steadily. And afterward Her Majesty sent for him, not to thank him for the spectacle, she'd have hated to reduce it to that. She sent for him to apologize. That a man in her service, at her table, had been made to carry 3 days of that in silence before the crown found the right way to stand behind him. She told him she was sorry it had taken so long. And she asked him one thing, the only thing she asked, and it's the reason I'm telling you any of this. What did she ask? She asked whether he would consent to teach again. Just a little. Not the school, she knew better than to ask him back to the school. She'd read the file too. But whether he might, when he chose, on his own terms, show a few of the young guardsmen what he knew about ending a thing without harm. Because a kingdom that keeps a man like that standing silent at a wall for 30 years and lets him take all of it to his grave, she said, is a kingdom that has failed to understand its own good fortune. Mrs. Carrow finally did smile then fully. He said yes. He'd been saying no to that question for 30 years to everyone who asked, and a champion had to poke him in the chest on national television before the right person asked it the right way. He teaches on Thursday mornings now. 6 of the young ones. He makes them take off the bearskin first. He says a man should learn this as himself, or not at all. She opened the door. There were 2 children at that first lesson at the back, watching, who were absolutely not supposed to be there, and whom nobody had the heart to send away. The princess and the young prince. They'd asked to come. Apparently the princess had said she wanted to learn how to make a bigger person stop without hurting them, which their mother thought was possibly the wisest thing anyone in the palace had said all year. And with that, Mrs. Carrow went back inside, and left me standing in the corridor with the whole of it finally in my hands. I do not have much more to give you. I am a fight reporter, and I have spent my life at the loud end of things, and the truest story I ever covered turned out to be the quietest. A man who did not throw a single punch, answered a champion in 10 seconds, and went back to a wall and asked for nothing. I drove past the palace a few weeks later, on an ordinary gray afternoon, the way you drive past a place that has come to mean something to you. And there, at the corner of the forecourt, in the red tunic and the tall black bearskin and the white gloves, stood a guardsman at his post, eyes level and forward, hands at his sides, still as still water, and the tourists walked past him taking photographs, and none of them looked twice, because a guardsman at a wall is the most ordinary sight in the kingdom. A decoration, a costume, a very expensive statue and a hat. I slowed the car. I could not tell from the road whether it was him. They are trained to look alike, that is half the point. It might have been Elias Marrow, choosing to be gentle for the 10,000th quiet morning, or it might have been young Tomas, or any of the 6 he taught on Thursdays now, learning the hardest lesson there is, that a man who knows how to end a thing is the only man truly free to choose not to. It did not matter which. That is what I finally understood, sitting in my slowed car on that gray, ordinary afternoon, and it is where I will leave you. It did not matter which man it was, because they were all now standing that wall with the same thing under the fur, the knowledge of what they could do, and the discipline, chosen every single morning in the cold with no cameras and no thanks, not to. Kwan Deveraux had spent 3 days trying to prove there was nobody home behind that stillness. He had been precisely wrong. There was somebody home behind every one of them. There always had been. And the whole of what those men are, the thing the champion could not see, the thing an 8-year-old princess understood before any of us, the thing worth building a school for and worth breaking your heart over and worth standing 30 silent years to protect, is simply this. The most dangerous men in the kingdom, deciding, in front of everyone and in front of no one, again and again and again, for as long as they are given to stand, to be the gentlest. That is what is under the fur. I have watched a great many strong men in a great many rings. I never saw strength until I saw a man refuse to use it and hand back a bearskin and go home and sleep. I put my camera down after that story, not for long, but for a while, some things you would rather have witnessed than sold. He went back to his post the same night. I checked. Of course I checked. It's my job to check. He was there in the morning. He is there still.